This is video 7B in the SQL series, and it's entitled Simple Stored Procedures in MySQL. I'm Jim Renault, a professor at Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this video presentation on simple stored procedures. This presentation is about creating and deleting simple stored procedures in MySQL. This discussion will include changing the SQL delimiter, and you'll see why we need to do this, creating a simple stored procedure, calling that procedure, and then dropping the procedure when it's no longer needed. I guess one of the first things we need to do, though, is just define what a stored procedure is. A stored procedure allows us to kind of write to group together SQL statements that we use on a regular basis into blocks so that we can use them over and over and over again. Maybe you've got an update procedure that runs several SQL statements always the same. Well, put them in a stored procedure in that way. You can change it in one place and call it in lots of other places. You can execute them whenever you need to. Maybe you've got a report you need to generate every day or every other day that it's a long SQL statement and you've got to modify some things, so some variables would be handy, and it just makes it a lot easier. Our next video in the series, video 7C, you'll see stored procedures where we use variables within the stored procedures. But just in this brief, simple introduction, we're not going to be using variables and values within our stored procedure. We're just going to have a group of simple statements. So we need several statements that we need to learn to start to create a stored procedure. In MySQL, the first thing we need to do when we're creating a stored procedure is we need to change the delimiter. Now, what changing the delimiter does is it tells MySQL, don't end the statement until you see the delimiter. Usually the delimiter is a semicolon in an SQL statement. But when you're creating a stored procedure, you have multiple SQL statements inside the stored procedure that have semicolons. So we have to say to MySQL, well, let's use the delimiter, and in my example, I'm going to use the delimiter $, to say the stored procedure doesn't end until we get to $. We're not done defining the stored procedure. And then after we define the stored procedure, we'll change the delimiter back to a semicolon to make MySQL happy with us again. So the statement used to actually create a stored procedure is create procedure. And after the words create procedure, you have to give your stored procedure a name. Don't use any of the words in SQL like select or insert or update because things won't be happy. Your name should be letters and numbers, maybe underscores. Give it a meaningful name, and then you include a set of parentheses. In video 7C, we'll see what to do with those parentheses and how we can add variables in those parentheses to receive and transmit values back to the user. The stored procedure, the next line after you do your create procedure, is to say begin. And that begins the procedure. And then we put our statements after the begin. And when we're done, we say end, but we have to say end with our new delimiter, not a semicolon like we usually end my SQL statement. So here we would say end $, and that would complete the stored procedure and save it. Let's look at an example. Okay, so maybe we've got a salesman who, our salesman in Texas, who regularly asks for a very specific report. And what he wants to see is a column with first name, last name, because he calls everybody by their first name, of course. So he wants to see a column with first name, last name. He wants to see their address. He wants in the third column their city, state, and zip code. And in the fourth column, he wants to see the last date we shipped something to the customer. The last date we shipped something to the customer. So let's create a stored procedure to do that. Well, first, let's look at the statement inside the begin. Inside the begin and end, the indented part, you'll see an SQL statement. Now it's a sophisticated little statement that's using a subquery to create the last shipment date. This could have been written using a join. I was just thinking of subqueries when I wrote this statement. So we start to create the stored procedure with the delimiter $$ up at the very top, which sets our SQL delimiter, my SQL delimiter to $$. So that says the next statement doesn't end until we get to $$ because we're creating a procedure. So we create the procedure, and I'm going to call the procedure CustomTX. That's a good name to call this procedure, right? I want a list of all the customers in Texas. We execute the begin. We then input our SQL statement to actually generate the report. We then end, and then we say $$. So that finishes the SQL statement. MySQL will then process the stored procedure and add it to its catalog within your current database. You probably should, after this statement, execute delimiter semicolon so that it doesn't, so that you don't get messed up and need $$ where you really want a semicolon at the end of all your statements. So there probably should be at the bottom here a delimiter semicolon to finish the delimiter or to finish the SQL statement and to return MySQL back to the state it was before you executed this create procedure. So to execute a stored procedure once we save it, it's as simple as just saying call. You say call, name of procedure, open and close parenthesis, and we may put values in there in the next presentation, semicolon, and it will generate that report. Now, if you want to generate that report every day or every hour or whenever, you can see that it will just do it almost automatically with that simple call. So much easier than keeping that great big statement and having to copy and paste it or even type it. Imagine how horrible that would be every time you want to generate the report. I also said we talk about how to delete a stored procedure when we no longer needed it. No use cluttering up everything with them. And all you have to do is say drop procedure, the procedure name. So this would be CustomTX, semicolon, boom, it's gone. Simple as that, deleted. If you need it again, you're going to have to recreate it at this point. This completes video 7B, Simple Stored Procedures. This presentation was copyright 2021 by James M. Renault, PhD. All rights are reserved. You can contact me at jrenault@shawnee.edu if you have any questions, critiques, comments, or anything else going on that I might be interested in. Um, yeah, not much else to say other than, hey, thanks for suffering through another one of these, and I'll see you in another presentation soon.